Students, today we're going to be talking about the life cycle of a fern. Now, ferns are highly interesting plants. There's about 12,000 species of them. They are seedless vascular plants. Now, of course, you're familiar with plants that produce seeds. And, of course, the seed crops that we rely on are vitally important to our civilization. Wheat and corn and so on. I'll do another lesson on that at some other time. But today, what we want to learn is the life cycle of this plant. It'll help us understand the life cycle and reproduction of other plants. Now, the land plants all evolved from an algal species of some unknown type, some ancestor that existed, an ancestor of all the land plants that existed back in Silurian times, 420 to 430 million years ago. We have fossil evidence of very simple plants that existed then, Cooksonia and Rhynia and a few others. Very simple type of land plant. Today, we even have a couple of species, actually I think 5 species of Psilotum, commonly known as the whisk fern. And when I was in school, we learned that this wasn't a fern at all, but belonged to a group known as the Psilophyta, a completely different phylum of plants from the ferns. However, today there's some controversy about the systematics or the taxonomy or phylogeny of this strange plant, Psilotum nudum, which really looks very much like Rhynia, which we find as a fossil. In any case, look very carefully here at the back of this frond. Do you see those spots? Okay, those spots are called sori, or fruiting bodies, and they produce the spores. Now, there's a very important principle to understand about plant biology, which is unlike animal reproduction, obviously. We all know that in human beings and in other animals, the gonads produce gametes. The process that produces gametes in animals is known as meiosis. Well, meiosis does not produce gametes in plants. Meiosis produces spores. Okay? And the spore eventually becomes a gametophyte, which in turn produces the gametes. The gametes fuse to produce the sporophyte. Now, as I go through this, you'll understand this more clearly. But before I do, let me just say a couple more things about ferns in general. There are about 12,000 species of seedless vascular plants, and many of them aren't that important today. Lycopodium, for example, a ground pine, it's known as, or Selaginella. These are ancient kinds of plants that aren't nearly as important in today's flora as they were 350, 300 million years ago when they formed great forests. Today, no seed ferns exist. However, there are large tree ferns that can be found throughout the tropics. One, in fact, produces the largest leaves known, a leaf which is about 9 meters in length and 5 meters in width. Now, that's a leaf, and that leaf would easily span the size of your garage at home. Think about it. That's a gigantic leaf. So, ferns do not produce seeds. So how in the world do they reproduce? This is how it works. On the back of the frond you saw these spots. These spots, or fruiting bodies, produce spores. They're known as sori. Within a sorus, sorus is singular, sori is plural. Within a sorus are these structures known as sporangia. And it's within the sporangia where the spores are formed. So you're beginning to pick up on that. Sporophyte, sporangia, spores. It should be easy to link that stuff together in your memory. Now, meiosis takes place here. During the springtime, after the snow melts, the frond will grow up from a rhizome. Okay? A rhizome is under the ground, and it's a modified stem. It's not a root. They grow up, and they look like little fiddleheads, the end of a violin or fiddle. They have that shape like this. And then they grow up, and cell division and growth occurs differentially on the two surfaces, and that results in kind of an unfolding of the young leaf, and then further growth produces the frond. So during the summer, the spores begin to be produced. These bodies will appear in the summer or late summer, and it's kind of interesting what happens, because as drying occurs, this region of the sporangia here, which is known as an annulus, begins to dry up, and as a result, it begins to move like this, like a tiny catapult. And then it opens up, and when the tension is released, the spores are flung a few centimeters, and spores are extremely tiny. We're just talking about one cell, okay? And they get up into the air, and they begin to float around and fly away, and if they should land somewhere where the conditions are right, they will begin to grow. So let's have a single spore here. So meiosis takes place in the sporangia, producing the spores. The spores are flying around. Now, since meiosis is reduction division, the number of chromosomes has been reduced by 1/2. Let's just take for the sake of this example, let's pretend, okay, that this particular fern has 1,024 chromosomes. Surprisingly, the ferns are the group of organisms with the greatest number of chromosomes. Why this should be so, nobody knows. It's kind of a mystery. As far as I know, it's never been solved. Some fern species have thousands of chromosomes. It's quite bizarre. All right. So if an individual cell, let's say, from this frond has 1,024 chromosomes, all right? So how many chromosomes would an individual spore have?
Paul Boga, please dial extension 129. Paul, 129.
Any idea? Okay, he doesn't know. So remember, meiosis is reduction division. It halves the number of chromosomes. So in a human being, for example, 46 chromosomes. Meiosis takes place in the reproductive organs, in the testes, for example, or in the ovary, and so that number would be 23. So the eggs have 23, the sperm have 23. Okay? So I'm sure you figured it out already. So these spores would contain 512 chromosomes. Okay? Half the number, reduction division. All right? Now, the individual spores, as I said, will float around in the wind, and if they happen to land somewhere which is favorable for their growth, then the spore will germinate, and it will undergo reproduction by mitosis. Mitosis. Okay? And that's the simpler form of these two types of cell divisions. Remember, meiosis halves the number of chromosomes and produces 4 cells. Mitosis produces two cells, each with the same number of chromosomes. All right. So each one of these cells, then, since they're being produced by mitosis, will have how many chromosomes? I hope you thought 512. Good. All right. This little body, then, is known as a proteinema, and it begins to grow eventually into a heart-shaped structure known as a prothallus. Okay, and remember, we're talking about reproduction, heart-shaped, okay? Prothallus. Okay? Thallus just means plant body, so this is before the plant body. On the prothallus, these rhizoids will begin to grow. The rhizoids absorb nutrients from the soil. Oftentimes, the gametophyte, by the way, this is a gametophyte, okay? Why? Because it's going to make the gametes. Yes, you got it, the gametes. So let me write that word down, gametophyte. Okay, phyte means plant, gamete, plant that produces the gametes. Sporophyte, sporophyte, the plant that produces the spores. Okay? All right. Now, on the prothallus, this heart-shaped prothallus, and they're oftentimes green, but not necessarily, and they've usually established a relationship with soil fungus, which helps feed the structure before it turns green and begins to produce its own food. You can find these things, by the way, usually around the base of a fern. Okay? I've dug them up myself. Okay? Here, you might see these, the female part of the prothallus, okay? The archegonia. And the archegonia produce, of course, the eggs. Here, near the rhizoids, are the antheridia. Okay? Most prothalli of most fern species are bisexual, containing both the female archegonia and the antheridia. The archegonia is shaped like a little flask, sort of like an Erlenmeyer flask, if you will, okay? With cells here and the egg here. And this is why ferns are found near sources of water, streams, lakes, and so on, okay? Because they require water. Why? Because the antheridia produce sperm. That's right. This plant makes sperm that swims. It's multiflagellated, means has a whole bunch of flagellae. Not just one flagellum, but many. Okay? So, I'll just draw a picture here of a multiflagellated sperm cell, and it finds its way to the egg. By swimming through a film of water. And it's actually attracted to the egg by compounds that are released here from the neck cells. As the neck cells decompose, these compounds are released, and the sperm, multiflagellated sperm, if you will, smells these. It doesn't have a nose, of course, but it can detect these compounds and swim in the direction of highest concentration. So it swims down this concentration gradient until it finds and swims through the neck of the archegonium and then fertilizes the egg. Now, remember, this started with a spore. And the spore had half the number of chromosomes. So, though every cell in the prothallus has half the number of chromosomes, and so the gametes have half the number of chromosomes. So, the sperm cell would have how many chromosomes in this example? Right, you got that right, 512. Since the egg formed on the gametophyte, it also had 512 chromosomes. They fuse together fertilization, and what do you get after fertilization? What's that cell called? Do you remember? A zygote. That is the beginning of the life of a new individual. Okay, so this is sexual reproduction. I know it's kind of strange, but this is how it works in ferns. And in fact, this is how it works in all plants. But of course, the details are very different in a flowering plant. We'll get to that later. In any case, so now we have the restoration of the diploid number. Okay, 512, 512, 1024. So this is the first cell in the life of the new fern plant. Okay, it begins to grow up. Okay, from that zygote, which is housed in the archegonium. Okay. Now you remember earlier when I said that land plants produce babies? They have little babies. Okay. And they're protected by a sterile jacket of cells. Well, this is what we've got here. Okay. This is what the archegonium is. All right. And this is true of all land plants, including the mosses, by the way, which I haven't said very much about. All right. So the sporophyte, the new generation here begins to grow up. Eventually, it becomes like its parent, and then will produce the fruiting bodies, or sori, with the sporangia, and the life cycle is complete. All right? It's important to get some of this vocabulary right so you can think about this. All right? All plants, by the way, go through this alternation. Alternation. What do we mean by alternation? Well, I'm alternating my left foot, then my right foot, then my left foot. I'm alternating my right hand and then my left hand, and then my right hand and then my left, alternating. Oops, back and forth, alternating. Okay, so we go from the sporophyte to the gametophyte, back to the sporophyte, and then to that's the life cycle. You got it? Alternation of generations. Important concept in botany. Without understanding this concept, you cannot understand plant reproduction. So, memorize these terms. Sporophyte. Why is it the sporophyte? Because it produces spores. The spores germinate into a gametophyte. Why is it called a gametophyte? Because it makes gametes. Okay? Meiosis produces spores in plants. Okay? Meiosis produces gametes in animals. That's a very essential difference between the two kingdoms of organisms. Okay? So we've gone over some of the basics here, a little bit on the evolution of the land plants, and we've also discussed some of the basic characteristics that made life on land possible. Stomates, a thick cuticle to prevent desiccation or drying out, and the fact that all plants go through this alternation of generation and produce babies, embryos. All right, thanks for your attention. If you have any questions, call me or email.